to their futures.
Well, good evening. Welcome. I think welcome. Many of you helped me get to Afghanistan last year, but of course the story starts a long time before then. I'm Jody Mackey. I was raised by 2 Air Force officers. My dad flew in B-52s and carried the nuclear codes, 3 tours, almost 3 years, and flew in B-52s for many years besides that. I was raised believing that that's how we created a really good world, a safe world that worked for everyone. And then I joined the military myself, and by the end of 5 years, I knew I wanted a different way. So I went to Evergreen, and I work in a fair trade place, Traditions in downtown. And 3 years ago, well, no, back when I was in the military and I wanted a different way, I knew it in my bones. I knew it to my core that I wouldn't use a weapon. I didn't think that created a good world. And so this summer, Medea Benjamin came through town and she gave a presentation on drones. And it's another time when I knew to my core that drones don't create a good world. At the time, I didn't have the facts about it, but she gave them to us and inspired us to go to Pakistan, where a country is using them. Over 350 times they've used drones to deliver weapons to the ground in the Fatah region, the federally administered tribal area. This is what a drone looks like. They're used here in the States along the borders. The Seattle Police Department has them. And next year, the FAA, that has been limiting the airspace that drones can be used in, has been given a mandate to open that up for more drones. So here we are using drones in Pakistan, which we aren't even at war with. And Medea was part of a group that put together a march that was going to Waziristan, part of the federally administered tribal area, so we could see what actually happened on the ground. And my boss, Dick Meyer, was at this speech, and I said, you know I have to go, right? So I'd been to this part of the world last year, and many of you helped me get there. I went to Afghanistan with my husband because of this youth group that we met about 3 years ago. This was the Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers. They were in Bamiyan, Afghanistan. And some of them look pretty young, but they were in a tent in this picture where they were vigiling just about 24 hours a day, sleeping there at night in the snow at 8,000 feet elevation in the middle of Afghanistan. And they were requesting that our president honor their request or recognize their request for peace in Afghanistan. This spoke to us, and so we started a vigil in downtown Olympia to vigil along with them. Can you imagine? Afghanistan is the worst place in the world to be a child, the worst place in the world to be a mom with a child. And here they are vigiling in the middle of a peace park that they developed, and they have Americans vigiling with them. Many people here vigiled with us. A week later, the U.S. ambassador came to these kids and said, I will carry your message to the president, who is about to receive his Nobel Peace Prize. And so they stopped vigiling, and we did too, but we had started a lifelong connection with them. This is part of what Bamiyan looks like. This is in the fall, the harvest season. And that gaping hole you see is where one of the Buddhas was that was built 1,700 years ago, when that was a thriving Buddhist area. March of 2001, is that right? March of 2001, the Taliban destroyed that Buddha, along with another one that's half a mile away from there. Isn't it like the Buddhas are still there, though, since they were carved out of the cliff? And impermanence is part of Buddhism. This is the Peace Park that the youth group, or now the Afghan Peace Volunteers, see, in Afghanistan you grow up pretty fast. And so they all felt like they were aging out of being a youth. They didn't want to age out, so they've changed their name, the Afghan Peace Volunteers. But this is the placard, and it says, even a drop of our love is stronger than your hate. Even a drop of our love is stronger than all the wars in the world. This is a picture that's on the UN representative's desk in Bamiyan. This is another of the projects that the youth group did. They raised the Dari word for peace into the center of those gaping holes. And so you helped us go, and we brought them to places that would bring them and us joy. This is their Bande Amir, their only national park. And it's a series of these jewel-toned lakes. Another thing we did, we went to the Afghan Women's Skills Development Center. We went to any place that would talk to us about what was happening in Afghanistan. And we went next to this. This is an internally displaced people's camp. You can see that there's dung being dried. What you can't see is that there's these little narrow channels where all the sewage flows. And the kids are in rags. So we left last September, and over the winter, over 100 people, mostly children, froze to death in camps just like this around Kabul. And that leads to a story here. I'll show you where we're at. Where the heart is Bamiyan. At the top corner of the box, inset box, is Kabul. When I flew into Kabul this time, the kids are all living there where they can go to school. They can get a little better education. They have an apartment, and that's where I stayed for 4 days. One of the things they're doing is they've brought in women who've never been to school, and they've almost never talked to other women outside of their, or people outside of their homes. I haven't found out exactly how they did this, but they gathered 23 women for seamstress classes. Now, what usually happens in seamstress classes that throughout Afghanistan is they come and they're actually paid for the class. At the end of the class, they get a sewing machine and they go home. And then there's nothing they can do with it because they can't meet other people. And so eventually they're hungry, they sell it, they need medicine, they sell it. And they wait for the next class so that they can make money. In Bamiyan, there's hundreds of little shops, and there's not a single woman working in any of them. So the Afghan Peace Volunteers were trying another model. They actually weren't paying the women. They were training them so that perhaps we could do an export business, so that they would actually have long-term work. It didn't make any sense to them. They're so used to being given the least amount possible that they didn't think that the people around them would be fair. And exporting out of Afghanistan is very difficult. And so I talked to them, but they didn't get this cooperative model or the fair trade model. They just, it didn't make sense. They can't trust the people around them. So I walked away not knowing what would happen. And then, hello, welcome. And then they came up with a new idea. Those kids that froze to death last year, they didn't have the blankets they needed. The women have sewing machines, and they know what to do with them now. They're making what they call duvets. We might call comforters, but that doesn't translate well. And so these duvets take $18 to make. They're for all the material, and the Afghan Peace Volunteers are gathering the material. They're bringing the material to the women, and who can make 2 duvets a day. So we're fundraising $20. The women can make $4 a day doing these, which is plenty to feed their families. And the duvets, then the Afghan Peace Volunteers bring to the internally displaced people's camps, and they give them away. This is the apartment that they're staying in now. And this is another project of theirs, the Global Days of Listening. This is where they talk to people all over the world. I'm sure they're going to talk to the people in Palestine tomorrow. It happens the 21st of each month. This is the wool that goes into the duvets. This is Abdullah and Ali. That's the first stack of duvets that they made. This is Samia, who we're hoping to bring around the world because she's a firecracker. So why are we here? I don't know all the reasons. This is one of them. TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. It's a way of bringing natural gas through. Here's another thing that, okay, so I got to go to Afghanistan just for 4 days before the march started. And then I went to Pakistan. So on the before shot, you see the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. There's a tribal people that are separated by that border. It's called the Durand Line. It was created by the Brits. And these people are still family, still related, still support each other. And so that's the line I was crossing. Now this after picture on the right-hand side, that's one thing that has Pakistanis up in arms. This is one of the recommendations, one of the ideas that the Americans have had to shift that part of the world. We create smaller countries, it's easier for us to control. Now, you see Afghanistan, and then all the colored areas, the federally administered tribal area in KPK. This is the area that's been bombed. You'll see a purple flower to the right. That's Islamabad, and that's where I flew into. That's where Islamabad is a planned city that was started about 70 years ago. Planned, there's just wildlands there. And so it's this open, well-developed city, and it's like Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not in a state, so that state, because if it was in Montana, Montana would gain more strength than the other states. So they picked a spot, Islamabad, and created a beautiful city out of it. Down at the bottom of the green, there's Tank. Right there. That's where we were heading. We were hoping to get through Tank, and actually this is an area where Americans, the green area is an area where Americans haven't been allowed for a long time. We were going into the Zila region, South Waziristan, where many of the bombs have happened. We met a lot of people. This is the Ambassador Richard Hoagland, and he was a really friendly man. He congenial, and he said that in his looking at the American documents, it showed that civilian casualties by drones had been in the low 2 figures. So what is that, 10, 12, 20? At the end, I mean, in the pink on the right with the white hair, that's Colonel Enright. Medea Benjamin is standing with him. There are people here who've worked on the drone issue for years and been arrested and spent time in jail and has spread the word as much as possible. And so they know this isn't true. Someone at the end, after he left, talked about the banality of evil, about how we get used to what happens in the world, so, or what the people around us do, so it doesn't seem evil. It didn't seem evil to him. So, this is Karim Khan on the left. Karim Khan is a very courageous man. He was the first Pakistani to bring a drone case to court. His son and brother and a man who was working on the mosque were killed in his home by a drone. 6 drones hit his home. We haven't asked him about the women in his family, but the women rarely leave the home. There tends to be 40 to 60 people living in a home in this part of in this part of Pakistan. But they never, part of their culture is that they are completely responsible for these people. There's a great respect and responsibility for the women and children in their lives, and that this could happen and they are so powerless about it. We don't ask about the women and children. I don't know who else he lost that day, but his son and his brother. His brother was a main teacher in the local girls' school, and he was working on training the Taliban, teaching the Taliban so that girls could go to school. And his son was working as security in the same school, but was hoping to be a teacher. So hundreds of girls in that area no longer have a teacher. He was so calm. You kind of get the gentleness in him. We can talk about the banality of evil, but sometimes you know what a good man he is. This is afterwards. The other two men were also survivors of drone attacks and had their stories to tell too. And I'm in there somewhere. They're holding bits of the missiles that hit their homes. This is Norbarum, and if you read what I put up on Facebook, you'll recognize him as the sullen-faced man. I also said I thought he was the most post-traumatic stress man that I witnessed. He has rushed to 27 drone strikes to take pictures so that we will see them and the drone strikes will stop. He's holding a picture of those 3 children. They're holding rocks from their neighbor's house, like those will save them. They don't know yet that their parents have been killed in the drone strike. There's no social services or anything like that in Waziristan. So they're living with their brother now, being raised, their family. Shahzad Akbar is standing. He's a lawyer who 5 years ago was not a defendant, but he was a prosecutor. He was a prosecutor. And this American Clive Stafford Smith said, no, look at what you can do. Now, Clive was one of the first lawyers in Guantanamo. Do you all know that in Guantanamo, they were supposed to be the worst of the worst in Guantanamo? 85% of them have been released. 85%. Now, how this relates to drones is we're no longer collecting people because it's messy then. 85% of them were innocent and it was a major recruiting tool. So instead we can just get rid of the evidence. And so that's part of how drones have become a bigger recruiting tool than Guantanamo, but it's also so unseen as long as it's not Americans. Now Noor has rushed to these 27 strikes. Only 27, but he has over 100 pictures of boys from those just 27 strikes. In some of those strikes, the people were already buried. He doesn't have pictures. In some of those strikes, the families were freaked out by seeing a camera and didn't want pictures. He has 2 pictures of girls, that's all. This is one of his pictures. It looks like a girl, except it's not. The mom was so distraught that she needed to do something, and she put lipstick on him. And so, over 100 boys' pictures, when there was something left to photograph. 2 girls. There's no pictures of women. The closest he's come is pictures of their clothes that they were wearing that are blown into the trees. Each of these people that we met, we gave an apology to. And here you see the beginning of a smile. When he smiled, he had the most beautiful face. Now, we went on a march, and we went on a march with Imran Khan, who did the organizing. Imran Khan is completely against the drones. He's running on an anti-corruption campaign. I've heard, I wouldn't believe with all of his stand, but he was very charismatic, and anti-corruption in Pakistan among the government is a wonderful direction to head into. So this is what we walked into for the beginning of the drone march. This was the press conference that we held. And at the end of our press conference, the Code Pinkers gathered together. Medea Benjamin runs an organization called Code Pink, and that's who organized the Americans. And it became really fun. We became known for singing chants. And it just went on and on for 45 minutes. We're singing this chant. We are going to Waziristan. We are going to Waziristan. We are marching to Waziristan. We are marching to Waziristan. We are marching, we are marching, we are marching to Waziristan. We are marching, we are marching, we are marching to Waziristan. And then we did a rally in one of the major markets, Juneau Market, and maybe 1,000 people were there. It got press, and there were people of all ages, and we did a candlelit vigil. And then the next morning we got on the buses. Now, if people were flying over, if media was flying over, we wanted it to look more interesting than just a bunch of cars. So these are Norbaram's photos. Here's Tariq Aziz. He's 16 years old. This was taken in Islamabad 3 days before he was killed. Less than 3 days before he was killed. He was at a drone conference, and he wanted to be a photographer who took pictures like Noor does. 3 days later, he was back in Waziristan with his 12-year-old cousin on the back of a motorcycle, and they were killed by a drone. Now, here we go. If he'd been captured, he could have been easily captured. He was in Islamabad less than 3 days before capturing. But anyway, it's enough. His name is Tariq Aziz. He was 16. We did have a lot of stress, so I started massaging wherever I could, and it kind of caught on. And we were in 2 buses among thousands of cars trying to stay together. We were supposed to be up with Imran Khan. Now this march was supposed to be, or this caravan should have gone about 5 hours. It was almost 15 hours. What we didn't know is that these caravans, it's like a political rally, and it's a race at the front. Imran Khan to stay in front, and anyone who wants to be in his cabinet to be as close to him as possible. We're in like minivans. We are not up at the front. We didn't even know about this, right? So we're way in the back. 15 hours later, we show up. It took a lot of, this is Medea Benjamin, it took a lot of coordination just to stay together and figure out what was happening, and what if we needed to stop for any reason. So there's Medea with multiple phones. So this is Imran Khan, and he's completely fluent in English, and he's very engaging, and this is the morning. I think he hasn't slept. We slept in, back to the caravan. We went through a really beautiful landscape, of course. And on the left, you see a building. That's Imran Khan's first school that he built. It cost 10% of what most universities cost in Pakistan, and 90% of the students get scholarships. He put it into a poor area so that those students could have an education. And he's planning on creating a medical school there, and he's also created a hospital that's free to most Pakistanis. If they don't have money, it's free, and it's for cancer treatment. And the vehicles are so interesting there. Aren't they beautiful? There were many beautiful trucks as we went, and I've heard that the paint jobs can cost almost as much as the trucks do. Now, we're going through little town after little town, and they're lining the streets to greet Imran Khan, but also to greet us. When they would realize who we were, we would often get peace signs and welcomes and photos, and the old and the young. PTI is Imran Khan's political party. And so we're on our way, hoping to get to Waziristan when we get notification that it's not going to happen. Government has blocked Tank Road, which is the road that leads to South Waziristan. Someday I'll get there. So 15 hours later, we still aren't at our destination. So we get there, and there's not really rooms for us. We don't know what we're doing. We're trying, but everyone is so interested in greeting us. And we finally said, it's a jirga, and everybody went, oh, and backed off and gave us space so we could figure out where we would stay. And our hosts made that happen. So here's the women all in a room trying to figure out where we're sleeping also. This ended about 3 in the morning. And this is when we walked out of our rooms. So people were so engaged with us, so happy that we were there, reaching out to us. Our host said there were a couple hundred men around the encampment to protect us, and then a mile out there would be a couple hundred more men. There were many people there to protect us and Imran Khan and all the people there. When they vow that you are safe, they will do anything in their they will give anything in their possession to keep us safe. And that's how I felt when I was there, very cared for. So instead of going to Tank, where we couldn't get to Waziristan, we held a mini rally here. Once again, we sang, and Medea Benjamin spoke, and people just exuberantly welcomed us. Then we headed back to Islamabad, and you can get an idea of the openness of Islamabad. But we weren't done protesting the drones. We decided to do a fast. And so we found a little market, and we did a Ramadan-style fast. So no food, no water from dawn to dusk. And as the day went by, more and more people joined us. And we did more singing. And this is Jamal Akbar. And he's very progressive man, liberal man, has been striving to create a peaceful Pakistan for many years. He spent 9 years in prison, tortured for the first 3 years of that, or the first 3 months of that, and then has been picked up regularly whenever he gets involved in politics, and the people who were around us knew of him. He spouted poetry to us that was about war and drones and peace. He had such a strong spirit, and I've wondered about this, about how people survive torture and go on to put themselves on the front line again and again and again. So Jamal has done that. Somehow seemed to remain whole. There are so many issues in Pakistan right now. There are people who are just disappeared, and 2 years later, the International Red Cross comes to the family and says, oh, they're in Bagram in Afghanistan. In Bagram, once your family connects with you, if you do everything right, every 2 months you can have a video conference with your family. But that video conference has to happen in Islamabad, and we're usually talking in Waziristan among really poor people. And so these are the families of these men that have been picked up and disappeared. And they were just stories of 14-year-olds who were dropping their parents off at the barber, and then they went down the street and got picked up. I could talk a long time about drones. You can pick this up elsewhere though too and not get the stories. But part of what drones do, but in Pakistan and these parts of the world, we pay people for information on who the bad guys are in a region. And then we'll drone that house, and then we might half an hour later drone it again to get the rescuers, because the rescuers must be related in our twisted thinking. And so that's part of what how courageous Noor is he rushes to these sites even though we do something called double tapping, striking again, which 10 years ago, 12 years ago, was one of the Americans' descriptions of true terrorism, striking a second time in a location in a short period of time. And so what happens when there's a drone strike is people know there's more coming. And in the community, they'll know more is probably coming, so they'll scatter, both because of the drone threat, but also because the Taliban is coming. They're going to find who ratted on that location. You don't want to be picked up by the Taliban. And so Noor rushes in there anyway. So it's creating a massive displacement of people in Waziristan, and they have no place to go. And these people also don't have a voice. They don't have a place to go to save these family members who have disappeared. So many issues. This is Afia Siddiqui's sister. Now, Afia Siddiqui, here in the States, you might have heard that she's a terrorist who tried to kill Americans. The story I heard in Pakistan that I think every Pakistani knows is that she got a doctorate here in the States. She's totally fluent in English. She was married and had 3 children, and they got divorced. And her ex-husband was related to a man who was waterboarded 180 times and gave her name as one of the terrorists. And so in 2003, she was picked up. She says by the Americans and the Pakistanis. We say we didn't know anything about her till 2008, but she's known as the screaming woman in Bagram Air Force, or in Bagram prison. There was only one woman there, and many believe it was Afia Siddiqui. And then in 2008, suddenly she shows up to the Americans, even though the Americans control that prison. She shows up, and apparently she got a gun and tried to shoot Americans, and so they shot her, and then she was found on a road, and she was brought to the States on originally charges of terrorism. She was convicted of other things, and she has life in prison, in maximum security prison in Texas. Her kids disappeared with her, right? 2 of them have been found. The baby hasn't been found. And these extrajudicial renditions are happening all over the world. And I believe that happened to Afia Siddiqui. She had no powder burns on her hands. There's nothing linking her to what they actually say she did. And Amnesty International says that it's a total travesty of justice. So, Afia Siddiqui. So we did so many things in Islamabad. And then I got to go to Lahore. And I got to go to Lahore and spend time with Zahid Chowdhury's family. This is Ramzan Chowdhury. And they stopped everything in their lives to take care of me and 2 other people. We were there for 2.5 days. And the first thing they did, besides show us family pictures and feed us beautiful food, was to take us to this very famous mosque. This mosque that was built in the 11th century on the site where this saint lived. And the saint was known to want to make sure that no one went to bed hungry in Lahore. And so they built this mosque, and it's grown and grown and grown over the years. And so there's these narrow, it was narrower than it looks in here, these narrow roads that go around. And there are vendors lining this road that people in Lahore come to give money to, so that the vendors will give food away. So as we're walking down, there's these spotlights on these lines of people who are there to eat, and there's a riot of noise, and there are people flowing through all these security checkpoints to get into this mosque. And we go in, and the saint has a crypt in the middle. I'm in the women's section, of course. It's very open and marble everywhere. And there's people singing the surahs as we walk through. And we get up to this beautiful marble lattice work, and the crypt is on the other, the saint is entombed on the other side, and there's roses covering it. And you can see roses on me. Ramazan Chowdhury brought those roses so that I could throw that into the saint also. And but they were cleaning that room, and so we went and we sat down, and once again people came up to us to welcome us. I think they knew we were part of the drone contingent, and also to practice their English, but it was so, this beautiful crowd around us. And then we went back past the women singing the surahs, and it felt like such a holy sight to me. I loved being there. So that was my first night in Lahore. And I didn't get to see it in the daylight. This isn't my photo, but this is another image of Data Darbar Mosque. So this is Malala. This happened while we were in Islamabad, that she was killed by the Taliban. Or no, she wasn't killed by the Taliban. Sorry, that she was shot by the Taliban. Malala is the woman who, or the young girl, she's 14 now, who was a voice for education and girl empowerment in Waziristan. And there was quite a response in Pakistan. There were rallies all over. And when we went to the Red Mosque, this is the 5th largest mosque in the world. Until about 30 years ago, it was the largest mosque in the world. It was built in the 1600s, the Red Mosque or the Red Fort. And this courtyard can hold 95,000 people, with 5,000 on the inside, so 100,000. And when I walked in, I heard Malala, this is 4 or 5 days after she was shot. Malala, it wasn't a chant, it was the cleric saying, this is not Islam, this way of behavior is not Islam, we are more than this. And I heard that this was happening all over Pakistan. So I haven't covered very much about drones, except that I know many of you feel the wrongness of them in your bones also. There's many different kinds, from little insect ones that they do call butterfly or dragonfly, to massive airplane-sized ones that carry lots of surveillance. They're here, they're in over 65 countries. During the last major siege in Palestine, when 1,300 people were killed, over 800 of them were killed by drones. They make it so that our president doesn't have to go through Congress to do these attacks in other countries. What if Russia or China or Iran said, oh, that guy, he threatens us, and came to the States and killed him? What if Cuba did that to somebody here in the States? It doesn't work, it doesn't create a good world, and the people of Pakistan know that. And many here in this room know that. And so it's worth standing up for to stop, because it doesn't create a better world. In the 8 years we've really been using, or 10 years we've really been using these aggressively in Pakistan and Afghanistan, there's not fewer terrorists. How long do we have to do this before we see it doesn't work? There is another way. So, I'm wondering if you have any questions. We'd like another story. He asked if the drones are perceived all the time. In Waziristan, there'll be maybe 6 in the air at once. They sound like a small plane, so people hear them all the time. They never know, and it's 24 hours a day. They never know who they're looking at, what they're targeting. Most of the drone strikes happen between 1 and 5 in the morning. So parents put their children to sleep and the kids don't know if they'll wake up. The parents don't know if they'll wake up. Yes, so that's one of the horrors of drones, is that is the oppression that it creates. It is like having a loaded gun to your head all the time when you're in Waziristan and there are drones overhead. So the drone strikes in Waziristan in the Fatah region have hit jirgas with elders and kids, 50 elders and kids at a time. It's hit funerals, it's hit schools, it's hit gatherings, because the drone operators who are here, usually in the States, aren't part of that culture. They don't understand what's happening there. So some kids are out doing jumping jacks. Suddenly we see it as a training ground for the Taliban. And we talk about all these, our government says all these men who were Taliban have been killed are low-level insurgents, many of whom were just, each family has to, under pressure, has to turn over a son to the Taliban in some of these regions. Others are starving and they get fed this way. They're common soldiers who are being killed, but we don't even know if they're soldiers or not, because now we're classifying insurgents there as any boys over 15, any men over 15. They look like an insurgent, right? They might have a beard and they might wear a turban. So that really knocks down our government can say, oh, there's hardly any civilians killed, because we can just classify them all as insurgents. Any other questions? It depends on where you are. In Iraq, pardon me, in Iraq, it was a military operation, but most of the military has pulled out, so they've turned it over to the State Department. The CIA does control a lot of it here in the States, but a lot of it's military. They're military bases. One of the things they do is they go to gaming conventions, because they've made the consoles for the drone operators here in the States look like game consoles, so that the people have less resistance to killing. The small drones are surveillance drones. They don't carry weaponry. The larger drones actually can listen to your cell phone and read text messages, but the little tiny ones are for surveillance. Bernie asked about a Democracy Now! Article today that talked about Karzai having the Afghans take over a prison. In January of this year, Bagram, we were supposed to turn over all prisoners to the Afghans, but there were some sneaky clauses in there. We kept picking people up, and that was after that January date. So now we have about 600 Afghans that we haven't turned over yet. And then also we have 50-something prisoners from Pakistan that we didn't have to turn over. It wasn't part of the agreement. And so, I don't know, was it Bagram? That might be pretty amazing. That I'm hopeful that some of those people will be released then. Well, they're living in, okay. Because of the drones, there's mass migration out of Waziristan. So the big cities in Pakistan are gathering up, tens of thousands of people into internally displaced people's camps. And so I don't know how far they have to go. Some people are, of course, still in Waziristan. Their homes are there, their farms are there, their animals are there. What do they do if they leave? So they either have to come from their homes in Waziristan, which is many hours, and they don't have the money, or from wherever else they've landed. am I aware of any congressional initiatives? Kucinich is talking a lot about drones, and he just, a couple of days ago, got Medea Benjamin and many lawyers together to give a couple-hour presentation in Congress. There is a lot of action on the East Coast where there's also drone operating bases. People are standing up like we do at Ground Zero here on the nuclear issue. Also down in Arizona, there's some actions. But in every state, there are factories, there are corporations that do something for drones. And I will start to look into that so that we can start making it clear that these corporations are no longer anonymous in this travesty. There's been no pictures like these in our major media. Our people don't know. These drones are supposed to be, very precise, and we're supposed to be able to know who we're hitting. So that's an interesting thing. We say there's two different kinds of drone strikes. There's signature strikes, where people are acting like, say they're doing jumping jacks in a row together, so they look like it's a training camp. We might hit that. If people look suspicious, even though we don't really know the culture, they look suspicious, that's called a signature strike, and that's the majority of the strikes that we do now. There's also a personality strike, where we were looking for Osama bin Laden, and the people who were at the game controls knew what to look for that, and then we would try to hit that. Okay. When I told you about a strike with Karim Khan, whose brother and son were killed in the local Mason. They said that a big-time terrorist had been caught in his house, except that that same man supposedly had been killed by a drone strike once before, and he was supposedly killed by a drone strike 2 times after that. Supposedly the last time they got him. But that's 5 drone strikes for one person, one supposed terrorist. But one supposed terrorist, when we know that 85% of the people in Guantanamo were released. They were there because of faulty intelligence. They were there because a neighbor didn't like them or wanted their land. So she asked if the government of Pakistan supported us being there. So obviously the people of Pakistan supported us being there. They abhor drones. They know all of these stories. So the government is in a delicate balance between seeming to support what the people want supported, and also they receive a lot from our government. And right now our government is pro-drone. So they also were supposed to be keeping us safe, and it's not supposed to be safe in Waziristan, which it's not. There's drones there in Waziristan, and there's a very angry people. I would be very angry if I lived there. And so that I met such reasonable people on my trip there, even though I was an American, and I could represent my government. These people welcomed us. So Zahid said that there are studies out of NYU and Stanford that are talking about drones and starting to talk about the civilians who have been killed. The highest estimates of civilians killed in those studies are 3,500. I believe there's many more than that from my experience with these people, but they really are doing just exactly the things that they can prove, the people that they can prove were civilians. So 3,500 over these last years, mostly with Obama. He's done 6 times, Obama's done 6 times more drone strikes in Pakistan than Bush did. Zahid Sharif, just highlighted the Data Danbar Mosque that I talked about earlier, that it is an amazing place in the middle of Lahore, that the food never runs out. It doesn't matter who you are, what you believe, you will be fed and welcomed there.
24/7.
24/7, 365 days a year. Both Zahids are excited about this place. I am too. This is beginning in an insidious way, and it's going to grow if we don't do something now. She says it's so insidious, we have to take a moral stand. On Democracy Now! Today, they talked about killer robots. It is known that sometimes these drones go rogue, and the most recent statistics on how often they crash, there were 67 crashes in 2009. It might be 76. And that was 1/3 of the fleet. 1/3 of their fleet crashed for the United States Air Force in 2009. So it sounds an awful lot like Terminator to me when they go rogue.
Soldiers, speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their future.